So good morning, everyone. We'll start with the Heart Sutra. I prostrated that Arya Tripitaka passed away here at one time, and Bhagavan was strolling on massive waters in together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena for profound perception. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Bodhichitta looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Bodhichitta: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Bodhichitta said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional practice, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional practice, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no mode of form. There is no I element, and so on, up to including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Om Gate Gate Padagate Padasam Gate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice a profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of the Dakinis in the three chakras, who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanations, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamara Sashadara Samaya Besma. Akasamara Sashadara Samara Yape. Tayata Om Gate Gate Padagate Padasam Gate Bodhi Soha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth,
May inner and outer hindrances be transformed. May they be dispelled. May they be pacified. May they be completely pacified. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma, and may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. On page 15, the mandala offering. Sachi Chokyi Shuksin Me Tok Trahamari Rabling Shi Ni Tikyen Pari Sange Shindu Nikte Owa Ye Droko Namadad Shin La Chu Pasu Jetsun Lahama Dampakyenam Ichokukala Kyense Chuzinji Jita Sampe No Jishin Malahasa Ye Chokyi Chapaku Solidam Guratna Mandala Kamnivayatayami Sangye Chudan Sakhi Chonam La Changchu Badu Dabni Kapsuchi Dagi Chinyengi Pesonam Pi Drola Panche Sangye Drupa Shu Sangye Chudan Sakhi Chonam La Changchu Badu Dabni Kapsuchi Dagi Chinyengi Pesonam Pi Drola Panche Sangye Drupa Shu Sangye Chudan Sakhi Chonam La Changchu Badu Damni Kapsuchi Dagi Chinyengi Pesunam Pi Trola Panche Sange Drupashu. So we have, we'll stay with this Refuge and Bodhichitta prayer. You may have noticed in the email or message from FPMT, Candrala's observation for the health of Lama Zopa Rinpoche is to recite the Refuge and Bodhichitta prayer, not the one we do before teachings, but instead of the third line, Dagi Chunyin, Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Ki. And so I thought at least at the times when we come together, it's a good opportunity to be able to recite, do some recitations, collect some recitations together. And then it's also advised, or one thing that's advised is to do maybe 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. Although I have found when I go for a walk or when I drive the car, it's a really great time to get out the mala and recite the Refuge and Bodhichitta prayer, hold Rinpoche's good health and long life in mind and Candrala's advice, and take those opportunities throughout the day when we're doing things anyway, which we don't have to focus and concentrate on. Well, we have to focus a little bit on, So, but where we're going, but yeah, it's a great opportunity, and then we accumulate more. And so if you do that, whatever you accumulate, however many malas or so, if you send them to spc@highergriva.org.au, and then, so this is over the next 2 months. And this particular period that we're in now, from the last full moon up to the next full moon when we celebrate Sakadawa, is that sort of, a very special time anyway for practice, in terms of being, celebrating and commemorating and remembering the birth and enlightenment and passing into parinirvana of Shakyamuni Buddha. So we can, sort of be as elaborate or as brief as we wish, but we'll do some now together. I have discovered that it's quicker in Tibetan than it is in English, because there's always more words and syllables in English than there is in Tibetan. And, I think every time we get these advice, I think, what a skillful means of getting us to do our practice anyway, because we have to do Refuge and Bodhichitta every day anyway. Certainly once we've made the commitment through taking Refuge. So it's a skillful means for getting us to do our practice. In that way, we can start to, if you're not memorized it already, it's only 4 lines, to memorize our practices. And then it's in your mind stream going lifetime to lifetime. We don't have to worry about it. Is that Rinpoche call it? Okay, so we can recite a couple together with the Jinsok Beacon Sonamki, and then go on, whether you want to do in English or Tibetan's up to you. We'll do silently for a little while. Sangye chodon soge chonam la janchu badu dabni kabsuchi jaki jinsoge sonam ki trola pancha sangye dropa sho sangye chodon soge chonam la. Sangye chodon soge chonam la janchu badu dabni kabsuchi jaki jinsoge sonam ki trola pancha sangye dropa sho. Okay. So then we're continuing on with our exploration of the mind, according to Buddhism, according to Western psychology as well. So here looking at Buddhist psychology and Western psychology today, looking at it in terms of understanding of, developing our understanding of emotions, or the components of emotion, the nature of destructive emotion and the nature of constructive emotion. So it's very interesting that in Tibetan or in Sanskrit in the Buddhist teachings, there's no such word for emotion as such. We talk about the different mental factors and so forth. So, but we're very familiar with that from Western psychology. So we're using that framework to unpack the essence of Buddhist psychology. So it's all based, as we're aware, on our fundamental desire, the fundamental desire of all living beings to be happy and to avoid suffering. So we can say even the very smallest being with the most unsophisticated unsophisticated support system from the mind avoids suffering. For example, if an amoeba is poked, it will scuttle away. I don't know if they scuttle. I don't know if scuttle is the right word for an amoeba, but they try to get away from it. Of course, they want to avoid it just like the rest of us. So all beings are propelled by this, propelled by, the desire not to be harmed. And it's interesting. I think thinking about amoebas reminded me that His Holiness the Dalai Lama at a teaching in Sydney that was at Olympic Park. It was a public talk. Anyway, I can't remember what the question was, but His Holiness was speculating, where does compassion kick in? So not only the thing of not wanting to suffer ourselves, but not wanting others to suffer. And His Holiness said, single-celled amoeba, I don't think so. I don't think they have compassion. His Holiness believes definitely mosquitoes don't have compassion. He's got a thing about mosquitoes, but he does live in India and they are pretty dangerous there. I mean, it's not to say they're the only place they're dangerous, but definitely not. But definitely mammals, all mammals. Like, this week I got, I think it was on the Friends of Chenrezig. There was a hen stuck in mud, and it was raining because in the eastern states it's been raining quite a bit and continuing. And another hen was came up and put its wing around the other one. It was very cute. And then there was a similar one, with frogs with their arms around each other and underneath a gerbera umbrella.
And it was an actual photo.
It was actual photo. It was, it wasn't staged. Anyway, apparently not. So, and this is so our desire not want to suffering is and want to be happy is understood with the primacy of mind as the agent for creating happiness and suffering. So we've developed, habits over beginningless lives, and so which have tremendous force. Our habits have, and we can just look at from birth in this life, all the habits that we've built up, and beyond that, our karma, our family, our life, the circumstances we find ourselves in. And especially we can say having a precious human rebirth as Dharma practitioners that is on the basis of having made stainless prayers for this in previous lives by and also our ethical conduct, most likely in the context of having taken vows before, our practice of generosity, and all of that is a result of our past virtuous karma. So, as Dharma practitioners, we have accumulated eons and eons of virtue in past lives. So there's no mistake that we're here wanting to investigate more. And so this ends up with very beneficial karmic results and opportunities that we're experiencing right now. And it's really good to focus on that, on the positivity. His Holiness the Dalai Lama said recently, we have to be more skillful to look at the conditions, opportunities our lives have, and to look at it from different angles. This is really, I think, the source of creativity and freshness when we get stuck in a rut. As I have probably said many times, my background is, part of my background is training in theatre. And one of the particular methods that we trained in, it was called Theatre of the Oppressed. And it was precisely about that, looking at things from different angles. I can remember one example of, having tables and chairs, and then as a group arranging them so that, tables and one chair. Was it? No, it was, anyway, there was a table, there were chairs, and you had to arrange them and with one chair in a more powerful position than the other. And there were so many different permutations of that, of different ways of, and it wasn't to have a fight about it, but just to see there can be different ways of viewing the same thing. Basically, that's what it is. And that's what the Buddha is inviting us to do. That's what Buddhist psychology is inviting us to do. It's what His Holiness is asking us to do, to bring fresh eyes to our experience. And then we have freedom, So, so the essence of Buddhist psychology is that we can create, infinite mental well-being beyond what we envisage is possible. And this was certainly made very clear to me when I did the Cultivating Emotional Balance teacher training, which was based on the very first Mind and Life conference of His Holiness the Dalai Lama on destructive emotions. So we'll come back to that. We'll come to that. But it was sort of looking at the fact that we have a great tradition of all these great Tibetan and Indian and yogis of having exquisite states of mind beyond what Western psychology could possibly, or has, I'm not saying it couldn't, but has regarded as, a healthy state of mind, exquisite attentional balance, being able to focus single pointedly when we look at shamatha practice and so forth for as long as you want without distraction. Cognitive balance, the clarity and insights and so forth that we gain, and emotional balance, of being just very even and not going to extremes and of either extremes of tantrum throwing or the other extreme of blissed out and being caught in that, which is not a bad place to be, but we can get stuck there. And the other one, conation, or we can say altruism, which is what propels us, what we're capable of. So these, having these four in a balance and working towards that. So we aim to cultivate this well-being, in Buddhist psychology. It's a science of mind, explaining methods to eliminate destructive thoughts and emotions, and methods to strengthen our constructive ones through our, we talk about developing the wisdoms of learning, hearing the teachings and so forth, and taking that into contemplation and taking that into meditation. And if we don't put it into practice, it is said we can develop an insensitivity to the Dharma. If we just have the teachings and don't actually put it into practice. And we there's some verses from Pabonka Rinpoche's Stages on Path to Enlightenment that warns against that. And the Tibetan analogy that is used is like, they use what we want to do is, so you've got leather, and you use the butter to soften the leather, and you mix it very thoroughly throughout the leather, and it makes it very soft and malleable, and you can make clothes or shoes or whatever it is you want to make out of that by really working it in well. And on the other hand, they also use leather as a container for butter to carry it like in a pouch. And in that way, it's not worked into the leather, it's sitting within the leather pouch. And there's a chemical reaction that goes on that makes the leather very, very hard. And then it's and you can't work with it. So the analogy is we've got to work with it, work the Dharma into our mind and work this into our mind. So it's quite a useful analogy to hold in our minds. Okay, so if we go back to in the first week, we had the verses from the Dhammapada, these famous verses that mind is the chief forerunner of evil states. Experience are led by and produced chiefly by the mind. If one speaks or acts with a corrupted, impure mind, suffering will follow, just like the wheel of an ox cart when the ox pulls. This is a different translation slightly than the one we use, but the sentiment's the same. Mind is the chief forerunner of all good states. Experiences are led by and produced by the mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness will follow along, just like one shadow that never departs. So we're talking about here in, destructive emotions and constructive emotions. So the very first verses here in the Dhammapada. So we have to look at, well, what are the factors that influence or determine whether the mind is impure or corrupt or whether it's pure? What determines that? So what determines that then is the mental factors. I mean, we say motivation and all sorts of things, but all the different mental factors, or we say compositional factors when we recite the Heart Sutra, or volitional formations. We looked at that when we were looking at the 12 links. So all of these different factors. So in English, of course, the closest equivalent is to say emotions, our emotions. It's not a sort of exact translation. And we look at the common emotions or volitional formations or compositional factors like anger, hatred, jealousy, compassion, and so forth. And so we usually, in English, we would call those emotions, right? And then we have to investigate, well, what is an emotion? Because it's in Tibetan, let's say, or in Sanskrit, this would come under also feeling, So what is an emotion? According to the American Psychological Association, okay, I'm sure you get many definitions in many different areas. An emotion is a complex reaction pattern involving experiential, behavioral, and physiological elements, we'll come back to that, by which an individual attempts to deal with a personally significant matter or event. So likewise, any mental factor or formation in Buddhism, such as loving kindness, would function to influence us in very, in different ways. So in conjunction with discrimination, with feeling, with intention, and so forth, different mental factors. So we'd say they don't act in isolation from each other, they cooperate. So in terms of destructive or constructive emotions in Buddhism, we generally talk about virtuous or non-virtuous states of mind, don't we? The different mental factors. Okay. So then in our Buddhist presentation, of course, we talk about destructive emotions as being non-virtuous mental factors or afflictions or deluded states of mind, because they inevitably lead to suffering, because they're rooted in distorted perceptions of reality. We're out of sync with reality. And so any behavior or any reaction triggered by them is inevitably a mistaken or inappropriate response to whatever events are occurring. And that only leads to suffering. Okay, before we go on in more detail, I want to look at this in terms of so anyway, we'll come up to looking at this in terms of identifying how we can diminish or even eliminate destructive emotions by focusing on their disadvantages, identifying their antidotes and so forth, their flaws. But before we do that, let's just do a brief meditation on the different aspects of emotion. So when we experience an emotional response, it affects us in different ways. The sort of physical response that we have, the affective or emotional response, a cognitive response in terms of our logic. Well, if it's a negative one, I always go to the negative ones, it goes out the window, shall I say. And this aspect of altruism or conation or so forth, or where we find meaning. So let's just take a few moments to reflect in meditation. So bringing our body to a conducive state of balance, tending to the natural sensations of your breath, wherever you experience that in your body, feeling well supported by the ground below. And as you breathe out, releasing, relaxing any tension, tightness anywhere in the body. The body's coming to a state of comfort and ease and settling your mind more and more into a meditative state. And as you attend to the space of the mind, bring to a state of calm or serviceability, stillness. Attentiveness. And just as they arise to your awareness in the space of your mind, just see if you notice different aspects of experience. Notice if it's a bodily sensation, something physical within your body. If it's a feeling aspect of the effect side, or pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Or even emotion. If it's particular thoughts, cognition. If it's intention or motivation, conation, so forth. Just as it is, see what arises into that space and how the mind reacts, how we come under the influence of an emotional reaction, learning firsthand how that is affecting us. So we're not holding on to it, just observing and noticing, and things will change because every moment of mind is different. Okay, then you can just relax. So it's only a couple of minutes just to observe, notice the pleasant sensation, notice the pleasant, unpleasant thoughts coming, reactiveness coming, or curiosity coming, or whatever. You know, I remember one time in Sydney leading a meditation. Friday mornings was a meditation, was one of the, it still is, you know, one of the meditation times in the morning at the centre, group meditation. And one day, one of the guys said, why do you always say, check your quality of mind, your state of mind? I was just like, well, all of the Buddha's teachings is all about that. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. Okay. So here, you know, and our experiences in that may have been neutral or positive or not so positive. Might have been a mix of things, probably is. Just to notice, it's good on any given day to check up with the state of our mind. And so then in terms of the destructive emotions, so anger, attachment, ignorance we talk about. As I mentioned, that very first Mind and Life conference of His Holiness the Dalai Lama meeting with the Western mind scientists. So first of all, His Holiness had a discussion with Daniel Goleman, who actually produced the book that came out of that because it was on destructive emotions. And at first, His Holiness said, could you organize a conference on disturbing emotions? And Daniel Goleman went, yes, and went away. And then about 6 months later, met with the Dalai Lama and said, just what do you mean by disturbing emotions? It's not that he doesn't know what a disturbing emotion is. But anyway, His Holiness said, destructive emotions. And it starts way before it becomes ever something out there in our experience in terms of what comes out our mouth or what comes in our actions. It's looking at, it is disturbing our mind. It's disturbing our sense of equanimity and peace that we all crave, or calmness and so forth. So that's the first danger of it. But then it's also destructive it's a more powerful way of saying. So that first Mind and Life conference was with Daniel Goleman, Richie Davidson, Alan Wallace, Paul Ekman, Eve Ekman, and actually I think Francis Varela was at that one as well. And so this then became the foundation for the development of the Cultivating Emotional Balance training with Paul Ekman and Alan Wallace, and now with Eve Ekman, who's also His Holiness asked her to do, and now it's complete, the Atlas of Emotions, which is quite, it's amazing. You looked at it, yeah, it's quite amazing, isn't it? And it has all the explanations and activities, and it's very, very thorough. It's quite profound. So which is quite interesting, her as a Buddhist, as well as, you know, understanding from psychology point of view is quite interesting. So Atlas of Emotions, if you just Google Atlas of Emotions, it'll come up. It's quite, yeah, it's wonderful. So we look at the destructive emotions, anger, attachment, ignorance, and so forth, as knowing that they're not in sync with reality. They can be reduced by analysing their faults. So we use reasoning, you know, to realise from our own personal experience that, you know, the immediate effects of destructive emotions, you know, how they create havoc in our lives and how they influence our day-to-day experience. So when I was many years ago, part of this research project in schools, it eventually got called Cooling Conflicts, but it started on the premise of the kids, and it was using theatre methods, so it was a fun way of going about it, but to identify how quickly you can see when anger arises in the mind. And so they had this sort of 3-step, when it's emerging, latent. So it's when it's that slight irritation in the mind. When it's emerging, you're in danger zone. It's about to come out the mouth or come out in the actions. And when it's manifest, where it does come out in actions, and it's too late. It's too late then. Because the mind has been hijacked by that emotion. And so, all reasoning goes out the window. You can't reason. And this was a peer group training, and it went from year 11, peer training, year 9, year 10 to year 8, all the way down to grade 3. And they all got it. They all got it. So this eventually became part of anti-bullying training in the schools. So wonderful. I mean, yeah, we all... Huh?
That's where you need it.
That's where you...
In the schools.
Yeah, in the schools, yeah. Yeah.
I don't think the kids learn it very well from their parents.
Yeah, so it was really great. And as I said, they addressed it in a fun way, not like, don't get angry, well, show me how, So again, using creativity. So we reason, right? We identify the states of mind, and the fact that, we can apply their respective antidotes. We learn about the antidotes, the different ways that we can eliminate the foundation of destructive states of mind. And then focusing on mental well-being, which is another thing I got really interested in when I was in Broome working with the Aboriginal Medical Services, and the notions of well-being in an Indigenous context, which was had a much more understanding of interdependence than I think in Western medicine. Physical, mental, emotional well-being being dependent on cultural well-being, community well-being, family well-being, sort of very holistic. But here in the Buddhist presentation, we really look at ourselves individually, analysing the benefits of cultivating constructive states of mind. And you see, because we have to value the benefits of it to say, well, it's not just I should, but how do I notice, again, from my own experience, the benefits of doing that, and repeatedly generating constructive thoughts and attitudes in sustained contemplation. So we need to do that in meditation before we try and apply it in our daily life, because we have built up those tremendously powerful habits in our minds that yank us in the other direction, even when we don't want to. Even, as Dharma practitioners, we're on the page of this, and yet we can see how many opportunities we have in life to counteract destructive emotions. So this is what has become quite exciting in the meetings with the Dalai Lama and the mind scientists and others as well. But of needing more research, I guess, rigorous research, and they can do it, seeing more precisely what areas of the brain are activated when when, for example, people develop compassion and loving kindness. And again, at our first Mind and Its Potential conference in Sydney with 2005, where people like, I think it was the first time Alan Wallace came to Australia, Philip Golden from the Centre for CCARE, Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, CCARE, in Stanford and so forth. And these amazing people who were there. And at that conference where Geshe Dawa prompted, put the electrodes here, not here, and see if you meditate on compassion, for example, there's the emotional response can be measured here before the sort of neural response in the brain. So that's quite interesting. Now they're doing that studies. And not only that, by meditating on compassion for just 10 minutes a day for 2 weeks, it's not a lot, right? Has a profound effect on the brain itself, much more than focusing on the breath. Nothing wrong with focusing on your breath. We can go a very long way with that, but how quickly that response is. So, you know, looking at the benefits of cultivating states of mind repeatedly, generating, you know, well, it takes some effort, you know, the positive thoughts, constructive thoughts and attitudes in contemplation, especially when we notice, you know, that our minds are going in the other direction. See, this is where I love, you know, I think the best, one of the very good news stories that was, you know, you can't have a destructive emotion and a constructive emotion or thought at the same time. So that way, if we say, okay, well, yeah, hey, look, I'll do all those Refuge and Bodhichitta prayers, you know, do my mantra, do the practice, and that way I'm not engaging in a negative thought at exactly the same time. I do, you know, one finger snap, 65 mental moments, but at least at the very same moment, you know, deliberately cultivating the positive states of mind and then watch what happens, you know. I guess because we have watched what happens is why we're here and continue to be here. We continue to see those benefits. So, you know, our destructive emotions are reduced, the constructive ones are enhanced by training like that, generating more self-awareness, more self-discipline in our self-discipline in our mind, in our meditation, but also in our ethics of non-harmfulness and the basis of taking vows, and more compassion towards others. And by more compassion towards others, regardless what difference it has for others, our suffering's reduced. So as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, that's being selfishly wise, wisely selfish, yeah, not selfishly wise, wisely selfish, it makes sense, like that. Yeah. And so I think we're all familiar with the medical analogy that is used in Buddhist psychology, that the doctor will analyze the nature, the cause of the sickness, examine the possibility for providing a cure for the patient and giving the right treatment that eliminates the sickness. So the Buddha explained that by the presentation of the Four Noble Truths to help us to recognize this is my current predicament. I'm suffering, and then understanding the causes of that and understanding that I can be free of that, it can be cured, and how to implement that cure. So then looking from a Western science perspective in terms of components of emotion. So it has a physiological component, so in the body, and sometimes when we meditate on looking at the physiological component. We certainly did that in the Cultivating Emotional Balance, you know. How do you know you're angry? Well, you know, the heat goes up in the body and heart beats faster, and you know, I don't think I sort of sit there making fists, but blood pumps to the hands and ready for a fisticuff fight. But at a more subtle level, there are chemical and electrical changes in the brain, and the changes in the galvanic skin response, heart rate, changes in the body. So we can experience that, and that's a good feedback mechanism that, oh yes, danger, before anything happens. We have an experiential component, which is our subjective, whether it be a feeling of an aspect of an emotion, or then if it's more prevalent, we talk about psychological moods. That's when of course they're all temporary, but a mood is sort of like when it sets in. So maybe depression or something like that sets in, and it's much more pervasive and seems much longer than a mere emotional response in the moment. And then the behavioral response, the words and actions that we engage with, motivated by that emotion. So when we're doing the Cultivating Emotional Balance teacher training, what I found really interesting was this emotional alert database that Paul Ekman presented, or timeline, emotional timeline, how quickly we can bring awareness into the picture, how quickly we can, you know, while it's still latent, you know, before that emotion has taken us over, talking about negative ones at the moment, destructive ones, how quickly we can shine that light of awareness on that. He said, well, you know, because we have what he calls an emotional alert database, which is a result of all our experiences and so forth, and then an environmental factor, something happens, comes along, and the two combine together and we react. So from a psychology point of view, that's how he presents, and how quickly you can bring awareness in before it becomes, which is much further down the track, we get to the point of our minds being hijacked by whatever emotion. Let's say we're talking about anger, and we have a regrettable emotional experience, and then we've got to go and apologize and, you know, sort of make up or break up or whatever, make up or break up. And oh yes, Venerable Mathieu Ricard was also part of that very first Mind and Life conference. So, you know, there have been those, you know, as we've seen the studies that great meditators such as Mathieu Ricard, Mingyur Rinpoche, and so forth, where they put the electrodes on. So he was one of those experiments where it was a simulated gunshot, right? So we have so Paul Ekman's hypothesis was that we can't override the sort of survival mechanism, that the survival mechanism that if we see something coming at us quickly or from above or so forth, it's sort of built into us from the cave days to, you know, automatically response in terms of survival. And anyway, so this so Mathieu Ricard was, there were other people as well, and they were told that there's going to be it's not actually going to be a gun going off, but the sound of a gun going off. So it was recorded sound of the gun going off. So you go into deep meditation and it's going to go off, and it's going to be random. You won't know when it comes. So they were sitting there in meditation. Mathieu Ricard, when it came randomly, kept sitting there in meditation. Not one, they put electrodes everywhere, not one muscle flinched. He kept meditating, which means it proved that you can override that. And you sort of go, but you don't want to override that. But the instruction was, this is a simulation, right? It wasn't, there's going to be a gun going off. So you didn't need to get out of the way. So that, because for years I thought, hold on a minute, but you'd want to react at that time. Yes.
I was just thinking it would be very helpful for people with phobias and trauma,
Yeah.
where they automatically overreact. This
Very,
training would be very good.
yes. Yeah. Well, also very good for us.
Yeah.
Generally good.
I can't imagine overcoming my fear of large spiders
Yeah.
by meditation.
You can't make the spider a rope. What could you make it? A dream week catcher. Yeah. So other people in this experiment, when that went off, you saw their reactions, and they all were like graphically, you know, they sort of did react physically very largely. So you can see here's a very, very skilled meditator who's be able to, you know, have that exquisite level of mental balance to not be perturbed in that situation at all, like not even a muscle going, let alone anything happening in terms of negative emotions arising. So It's quite possible. And then we look at so in terms of the Buddhist presentation about the components of emotion, so there can be, okay, it's distinguishing the physiological elements aren't the emotion itself. They can accompany the emotion, and that's why you can override those in a given situation. Again, the behavioral elements, the actions of body and speech, are the effects of the emotion and not the emotion itself. So it's driven by that state of mind, but they're not themselves that state of mind. So just using this example again of His Holiness the Dalai Lama with being asked on the 730 report many years ago, don't you get angry when you see, when there was a particular crackdown from the Chinese in Tibet, don't you get angry when you see what's happening to your country? You must get angry about that. And His Holiness said, I observe anger arise in my mind, I observe it fade away 1 minute. And the reason I can do that is because I've meditated since I was 6 years old. So he's saying it's possible to override that reaction, not get caught up in it, not get cognitively fused with that, to notice that emotion because he's familiarized with the signals of that emotion, but not get hooked into the emotion because it's not the emotion itself. You see what that is. So we talk about this in the presentation, or the Buddha talked about this in the presentation of mind and mental factors. It's not just one mind. Our thoughts, our ideas, our memories, our virtues, our non-virtuous states of mind are factors arising, we say, in the retinue of a main mind. I like the fact of a retinue. I like to think that all the bits and pieces are coming along together. Okay. And then emotions, according to Buddhism, as a mental state and subjective experience do possess an experiential component. So in the Buddhist presentation, we speak about emotions just in terms of what we experience, what we feel, what we think. In other words, it's all in the mind. It's all a product of the mind. And that we can work with because the mind, moment by moment, is changing. I forget how many now. I've got it in here somewhere. 65 mental moments in a finger snap, 56 million and 120,000, something like that in a day. So it'd be great to be able to direct each and every one of those mental moments in the way we want it to direct. So destructive emotions then, we say are what? As Daniel Goleman said, what do you mean? They're harmful to ourselves and others. So it makes our state of mind destructive. And then we say, well, what do you mean by harmful? What are the nuances, the degrees and manner which something might appear to be harmful? Is it possible that it may not be harmful? Is it something that may appear to be harmful but may not be? Can there be alternative views? Can we actually be happy without having completely abandoned destructive emotions? Is it possible to sort of see it in another way? Or say anger, we usually label as a destructive emotion. Can we see it as something constructive? Can you think any examples of what we might consider to be a destructive emotion as something constructive? Anyone?
In general terms, something that gives you the ability to reflect on that negative emotion and use it to your advantage to understand how you.
Okay, so that's one way where you see that it's a negative emotion or disturbing emotion, and see it as an opportunity to work with it, to find an antidote, to realize, okay, it's not inherently part of my mind. I can work with it and I can do something. But then you would say, what's enabling you to do that is your wisdom mind, isn't it? No, I mean, just, yeah. You have to have that concept already to do that. Any examples where what we might just say is a negative emotion, disturbing emotion is actually positive or can be positive?
Well, there's the cases where it's your own survival and safety, where the negative emotion will, like flight or fight.
Flight or fight, when it is actually about survival. Yeah.
So at that level, that's a positive result. If you're looking after yourself, you're either going to run away or fight. Yeah, could be. I mean, it's good for us to interrogate and see. Yes.
If it prompts you to realise that things are not right, like a danger, bad situation, but you'd have to then move on to a more positive mind to take appropriate action.
Mm-hmm.
Would take good responses while you were still angry. You don't create more.
No, it's the recognition of that and saying, so that's when we look at, okay, what can I do in that situation? Similar to what Elliot was saying, of being able to transform that or change that I don't have to stay stuck in the negative. So this is when we come to using the wisdom aspect through our study and for our own experience to know there can be alternative states of mind.
I think if you watch known as a submissive personality,
Yes.
you tend not to express that anger. So I'll do that unpaid overtime, or I'll do one to, clean up the mess.
You don't express your anger if you're submissive type.
Again, if you don't express your anger, you also tend not to express your affection. You tend to withdraw, and so it can cut you off from other people.
Yeah.
In such a way.
Yeah.
I won't go out because I don't want to see that movie, or I don't like Indian food or whatever. So, and they just withdraw rather than say, no, this is what I think, or,
yeah. So you're talking about it in a social situation, because I was thinking, what's wrong with not liking Indian food or a particular movie? But it's like, I don't want to offend that person. Yeah. Because
they won't speak up,
Not speaking up. And so you internalize that then, and then you're not addressing it. Yeah. So it can get very toxic.
I read one book by a psychologist that worked in prisons.
Yeah.
And most of them grew up in violent households, so that sort of fight responses, stimulus response is ingrained. This is great, from a very early age.
Yeah.
And he explained to them a little basic neurobiology, neurology, and this is what happens. And most of them were deeply ashamed of what they've done. But he said, so your anger is not your fault. It's the way your brain is wired.
Right.
It is your responsibility.
Yeah, anger's.
That very subtle distinction.
Yeah, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. That's nice, isn't it? Yeah, I like that one. That's very helpful. The anger is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. So I guess from modern psychology, Western psychology, the scientific standard for a destructive emotion is whether or not it's harmful to yourself or others. But the Buddhist idea is much more subtle. It's at the moment that it disrupts the mind's equilibrium, which is why we want to get to the point of, yes, it's my responsibility. So, it generates a very unpeaceful state of mind. So until, so as soon as we recognize that, my mind is disturbed, this is much more subtle idea than, oh, it's about harming myself or others. You know, that's at a very manifest level. And we can see that, you know, when our mind is agitated, how it disturbs our perceptions, our perspective, and our actions get distorted on that basis. And that, you know, and then we harm others. So this is like seeing how quickly I can bring awareness in at a very subtle level of, oh yes, now my mind is disturbed. And we really can only do that, I think, in meditation practice. I mean, you're not going to be doing, well, if you're very skilled at it, you can do it when you're engaging with someone, but unless we've done that in our meditation practice, it's very hard once we're engaging with someone. So we look at, you know, the 3 poisons we say, or we say disturbing states of mind, afflictions, not allowing the mind to be at peace, we could say. And other definitions is as delusions. They're not factual, they're not truth. They exaggerate how things appear, and how we interact with people and phenomena as a result is mistaken. It's a mistaken view of how things are. And that from that mistaken view, then all sorts of unhelpful states of mind are generated. And, you know, we're driven by that to destructive habits of the mind. So it says that delusions are false, they're not true. So we have to ask, well, does that mean, are these states of mind lying to me? Are they liars? And if yes, why do we listen to them? Why is it that we listen to them? So it's good to interrogate and look at from that perspective. There's a perspective of, now, why am I following that when it's in fact totally erroneous state of mind? Sometimes it's so crazy that we can just get rid of it straight away, right? And just go, oh, that's crazy. But a lot of the time we're hooked in, we're seduced, isn't it? Also, other definitions which I find helpful, like toxic emotions or poisons that really, you know, sort of poison our perspective. And then we, in a Buddhist presentation, look at the whole presentation on non-virtuous mental factors. So we start with the 3 root poisons we're familiar with: attachment, the habitual reaction to pleasant feelings, wanting more. Anger, the habitual reaction to unpleasant feelings, and ignorance, the habitual reaction to neutral feelings. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, talking about attachment, talks about it's a mental factor based on distorted attention that exaggerates the attractiveness of a polluted object. In other words, an object under the influence of ignorance, which is basically anything we engage with, because our mind is pervaded by this mistaken mind of ignorance or confusion, that wishes for and takes strong interest in an object, be it a person, a place, a physical object, or an idea. So take, for example, chocolate. Attachment or desire for chocolate, I think, is a common, but the sense that the deliciousness is there from its own side. Now you know, what is chocolate? It's a sort of compounded different ingredients, compounded product. And deliciousness is not in the list of those ingredients, if you look at the list of ingredients, and yet we make up our mind that goes with the chocolate's deliciousness. Of course, you know, advertising, I think, has a lot to play in there. I think it's easier to promote the deliciousness of chocolate than it used to be in the old days when they had ads for cigarette smoking. there always seemed to be blokes on horses and things like this. And it's just like, I didn't get the connection, but John Wayne. Oh, is that what it is? Totally missed me by. Right. Okay. So we waste a lot of time chasing after this, looking at external things, thinking, oh, my happiness is out there. We even, you know, might reflect as a Dharma practitioner, still do that, you know. Or we look at, as soon as the border opened up, everyone's traveling, you know. Oh, let me travel to a COVID hotspot in Asia somewhere. My happiness is there. I felt trapped. Anyway, we can look at all the different ways we're hooked in. Or as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, go to the supermarket. No, not the supermarket, the shopping mall. More interesting because there's more shops to choose from. Not to buy anything, just to observe that mind being gravitating towards. Say yes.
Yeah, sorry, I did that.
You tried it?
I always go to the food section for some reason. I wanted to ask. I always go to the food mall area.
Yes, in Sydney, the food,
Yeah.
or was it David Jones Food Hall?
Oh, yeah.
I know a lot of exotic stuff there, even if you don't buy because it's too expensive.
I wanted to ask about grief because I
Grief.
didn't actually know that grief was a negative emotion, and until you told me it was. And is that because it's a form of attachment to somebody who has?
I don't remember saying that grief was a negative emotion. Did I say grief was a negative emotion? I mean, it's not sort of, maybe not directly, yeah. So and why I'm saying that, for many, many years, actually, it's only been in recent years that this is Rinpoche's behavior has manifested differently. But for years and years and years, every time Rinpoche would say Lama Yeshe's name, you'd notice it'd be like almost tears coming at the eyes, you know, the sadness about the teacher passing. Now, we can say that's a lesson to us of the importance of valuing that. So I think if we look at it as a destructive emotion, we say, does it disturb the mind? Does it disturb our peace? And on that basis, we'd have to say, yes, it's a destructive emotion. And I think it's interesting because we say, is it necessarily negative? You know, is it necessarily harmful? We just have to interrogate and see, because a lot of the literature on grief is that you've got to go through it to go through it, right?
I think you can't deny it. It'd be harmful to deny.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you wouldn't want to get stuck there.
But that's right, but you don't want to get stuck there. But by going through it, then you become unstuck, rather than, I've never seen it in a list of non-virtuous states of mind or anything like that. And even, I mean, in the cultivating emotional balance training, we did have sadness there. I think the only positive one we looked at there was happiness. But what we were looking at were emotions that, and this was called into Paul Ekman's research, that people all around the world have common, and he was studying facial responses, common expression of those particular emotions. So that's a very specific application. It did have sadness, and they used, there's a movie, I can't remember the name of the movie, it's a children's movie, but this was the example used and it was very useful. It's where the horse is sinking in the lake of sadness. Anybody seen a movie with that reference to it? Anyway, it's sort of being wallowed up. So that would be a danger to drown from it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have different cultures have different length of grieving periods, but like the Greek practice of wearing black for that period of time for a year, is it? Something. And it's nice to have it not just be a few days or you know, in the employment thing where they'd give you compassionate leave of a couple of days, like you're supposed to be over it now. Can you give me compassionate leave for a year or two? Maybe not. Yeah. And you see that, like the Tibetans, the Nepalis will do the same thing, you know, a year, each year on that anniversary, they'll come and make offerings of their dearly departed. They'll come and make offerings on the altar. Yes, as part of that process of dealing with it.
Many years afterwards.
Many years afterwards. And see, that's a way of also transforming that into a positive, making offerings and yeah. Yeah, it's very nice. Yeah. Okay. Lama Yeshe in Becoming Your Own Therapist, talking about the nature of destructive emotions. Said, we often choose just one small thing, one atom or single living being, thinking this is the one for me, this is the best. And we create extremes of value. We grossly exaggerate the value of the one that we like and engender disdain for all the rest. This is not good for you, for your mental peace. So again, it's like, is it disturbing my mind? Indeed, you should examine your behavior and say, why am I doing this? I think it's useful to have these questions. Why am I doing this? And reflect on that again and again. You know? And Lama gives the response, my unrealistic, egocentric mind is polluting my consciousness. So then we have to look at, well, how does that work? How does it do that? What does ego mind say to me at those times? You know, and this is where we familiarize with those states of mind, not because we want more of them, but because we want to nip them in the bud, which is what meditation is about familiarizing. Yes, we want to familiarize with the antidotes, the virtuous states of mind as well, but you know, familiarizing with what is there. Notice and just question, what is my ego mind saying? Why am I doing this? Or as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said in that meeting, early meeting with the Western scientists, and one talked about low self-esteem, and then it took a while to find a translation where His Holiness could, because there are no Tibetan words for low self-esteem. And then His Holiness threw his robes over his head and cried, and why would a human being do this to yourself? We don't think like that I'm doing this to myself, but it's good to change those perspectives and realize, oh, actually I am doing it to myself. Right? And then, so that's a mind of attachment, desire, and yeah, going to the shops and not buying it's a very useful thing. I think they have to be very expensive shops so that you're not going to be, you're not going to be tempted. The Harley shop, right? Okay. We've all got our preferred. Yeah, don't go to one where you're going to walk out with a lot of debt. That means you failed. You failed. And so then we look at anger, of course, and which is sort of going beyond upset, you know, a mental factor that referring to one of the three objects, sentient beings, usually people in our experience, and probably more than animals, although the spider might be in this category. I don't really get angry with the spiders. Probably more fear. One's own suffering and the circumstances that produce that, such as, well, weapons or thorns, it says. So, which is really interesting, because there's the story of the meditator who had outside their house, it was it a rose bush? Anyway, with thorns on it. And they kept it there as a reminder for their practice, so that they, yeah. I have to say that thorns in Namibia are like this big, and they rip through the soles of your shoes. And fortunately, one of my friends, his father was a cobbler, so you just go to his place and get a new pair of shoes and sort of rip through. So I don't know if I was angry with the thorns, but anyway, I guess you can get angry with anything, can't we? But agitates the mind, being unable to bear or wanting to harm the object or harm the other person. And this is where, when we study, for example, Bodhisattva's way of life, a whole chapter on patience, the antidote to anger. And it goes through absolutely every characteristic and permutation of anger and so forth, and how to counteract that. It's quite, we could spend lifetimes just on that one, particularly in the world today where anger seems to be so just right there all the time, isn't it? And we're seeing the consequences of that, Thank you for the flowers, keeping the thought of Ukraine in our minds. How can we not keep that thought? And also Lama Zopa Rinpoche, is it out here? Wrote a book called Patience, which is a commentary on that Bodhisattva's way of life, on that chapter. I remember there was now a former monk, a Nepali monk that was at Vajrayana Institute for a very long time, and he said every day he reads that chapter on patience. And so that's a really good way to keep that fresh in our mind of, oh yes, all the different ways I can counteract that mind because it arises so frequently, Yeah.
I've read about Paul Ekman.
Yes.
When he was, his job was he used to travel for
He travelled a lot.
Whenever he rang his wife and she didn't answer the phone straight away, he would get into a white rage. And it came to him that when he was 14 years old, his mother had suicide.
Right.
So he went to school and came home to God. And so behind the rage was this deep-seated fear of abandonment.
Yeah.
So understanding and have compassion.
Having compassion for your anger, but also, as you're describing, and this is where psychology is great to realize this is in the moment, this is an abnormal response to this situation. So what's underneath that, and unpacking what's underneath that. And then if we are able to do that and be released from that situation being triggered, it's like he says about the emotional alert database, and the environmental factor was his wife being late or so forth, and abandonment comes up because of his situation of what happened to him when he was a child. So yeah, we all have that. This is where, recognize the trigger points, but also where psychology is fantastic for that. So it's not saying that it's great value, tremendous great value. So the Dalai Lama says, when we are angry with someone, how does that object appear right at that time? That's really good. These are useful questions. How does that object appear to me that I'm angry at, be it a person or event or whatever? And we talk about, or even the anger itself, how does the anger appear? In the 8 verses, it says, vigilant for the moment a delusion appears in my mind, because the moment it appears in the mind is when we can do something about it, when it's not yet full-blown rage in this anger. We get angry because the person has harmed us in our perception, is harming us in our perception, or will harm me. So that's how we think, And then, as His Holiness says, we investigate. What is this I that is harmed? Where is this I that is harmed? Now, in the middle of the heat of anger, we're not going to be going, oh, it's just my ego, mind, self-cherishing being harmed. We're not. We're just going to react, isn't it? But, but as His Holiness says, the very moment we have the feeling that both the subject, I, myself, and the object, the enemy, are very solid and independent. So this is our mistaken view, is that there's me and there's you, and you are my problem. It's all about you. And then we put ourselves in 2 different camps. It's the basis of duels. When people line up for their dueling, and it was like, well, I'll just shoot you. End of my problem until the next. Lama's, Geshe Zopa calls them object of compassion, comes along, my object of compassion. So reframing, I think we'll stop right there for today because we've run out of time. Food for thought. So continue on with, during meditation and observing the different factors arising in mind, not to get cognitively fused with any one of them, but just to notice, oh yeah, well, yeah, those thoughts are going down. Oh, that's self-grasping. Oh, that's irritation, or that's desire, whatever. We've got them all. Just familiarize. Okay. We'll dedicate. Thank you very much. Just a couple of announcements. We have meditation tomorrow morning at 10, and then on Sunday morning at 10. And then the Discovering Buddhism at 11:30. And then we go on from there. Okay. So those of you who have the book, page 29. Gewadi Yududa Lama Sange Trikune Drowa Chika Malupa De Salago Pashu Janchup Sencho Grimposhe Make Panam Gekuchi Gewan Yampa Me Payang Gongne Gondu Pelwa Shu. And then the long life prayers for our gurus. Page 19. Chikten kam depende malupa gang le shongwe sampe ye jino katrin some tenzin gyat sola so adepso tu shu. Page 22. Tu so shang xin cham gen giao wei tin zin gan tao wei kon so tu po se Chuk sum ko wei le mon tu dro pa da so do je mon do ja tin shu. Lord of Dharma, who in accordance with the various dispositions of those to be subdued, makes clear in the light of your well-spoken advice the sacred Ganden tradition, essence of Buddha's teachings, O foremost and holy Lama, to you who are supreme, O Lama, please, please live long. Just stop the recording. Fiona, just stay there for a sec.